And if we treat each other with dignity and respect, and reach out like that with courtesy, that's going to go a long ways in starting a friendship.
And another thing is that the friendship has to be greater than the conflict. And so being right can't be the most important thing. The other person is really more important. As you're trying to figure this out, there's not a real science to it, but as you initiate conversations, in the Bible, it talks about men and acting like men. The word there actually means initiate. And it also says take courage. So if we as Christians by faith will just go up to someone who's different and just say hello, that can go a long ways, or begin to talk about things. Or don't be afraid to make mistakes and just say, hey, you know what? Can I ask you a really silly question? All this stuff is going on. I don't know what's going on. Could I ask you a couple of questions? Would you be patient enough to let me be ignorant and just help me with that? We're the lost words, but I don't feel so lost with you. Fly through the mountain ranges, but I'll never see the danger. That fire boss is swinging, but our hearts are full. I'm not worried when I'm with you.
Hey, my friends, welcome back to Let's Be Real. I am super excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking with Gary Chapman. Yes, the Gary Chapman, everyone. The guy who wrote the Love Languages book. You might not have known that was his name, but I guarantee like 98% of you know what the Love Languages book is. Gary is a great communicator. He just takes complicated concepts and makes them simple. And he's done that yet again, this time with his good friend, Clarence Shuler, Gary Chapman and Clarence Shuler, life-changing cross-cultural friendships. You know that we are all about this on Let's Be Real. We're all about helping you take practical steps toward the life that you want. And most everyone I talk to would love to be in more significant relationships with people from other cultures, from other races, but they often just don't know where to start. And so Gary and Clarence teach us about their relationship that's been going on since the 70s during desegregation and integration in the schools. And they take us all the way through some really, really practical ways that we can make steps toward flourishing friendships with people from other cultures, from other races, from other backgrounds, and how we can do that well. So take a listen. You guys are going to love this. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for coming and being here with us on Let's Be Real. If you're joining us on YouTube, if you're over on our podcast, wherever you are, I'm so glad to have Gary Chapman and Clarence Shuler here with us today. We're going to talk about life-changing friendships. And first of all, you guys, I have to have you introduce each other because this whole book is based on your friendship. You guys have been friends for so long. So I want to ask you, okay, to give me 3 words to describe your friend, okay? So Clarence, I want you to go first. 3 words to describe Gary, and then Gary's gonna do the same. And we'll see. I mean, if y'all need to have a conflict, now's the time. Go ahead.
Well, we have had a conflict. We might talk about it today. I think the first thing, and Nicole, thanks for letting me go first. I think the first thing I would say about Gary would be his integrity. I was blown away when I first met him as a 14-year-old by his character and integrity. And then over the years, he's always had integrity. We've had some tough conversations about different things, not so much he and me, but about even some business things. And I've had to trust him, but he's always had integrity. And so that's really been good. Probably the biggest thing for me, because of the 5 love languages, my love languages, words of affirmation and encouragement. He has never said a negative word to me in 54 years. Now he may have, he maybe should have, but we might go there today too. But he has always encouraged me, and I thought about that. I said he has never said a negative word. Now he has challenged me sometimes when I've disappointed him, but he's always been an encourager. And I would think the other thing that kind of goes with all that, he's been so incredibly loyal. He not only has he loved me, but, since you've read the book, he loves my family, and they consider him their grandparent. And he's like, when my dad died when I was 20, he became my dad. And then his daughter and his son have shared him, Shelly and Derek have shared him with me. And so, but he's extremely loyal. So that's those are 3 words I would characterize him by.
Gary, I hope your love language is words of affirmation, because that was a very kind set of things to hear about yourself.
It is. That's really good. I would say I would say three things about Clarence. One is he's black, he's getting old, and he may be getting senile.
Oh, there goes that negative word, guys. We broke the streak. It's not any longer. You're like, except for that one time, he's never said a negative word.
Oh.
But I'm not really black. I'm actually pleasing brown. So that's what my mother said.
Well, no, I seriously, what I would say about Clarence is one is I've always appreciated the fact that he reaches out to people. That started with our relationship. He started it because he came into my space, and he does that with other people. I mean, he just reaches out to other people. And the second thing I would say is that he just has a heart of love. I mean, he cares about people and prays for people and counsels people, and all of those are expressions of love to him. And the third thing I'd say is he made a really good choice when he married Brenda.
This is true.
It's a wise man who marries up. That's all I'm going to say. So
that's right.
That's awesome, you guys. And y'all, this is, and I love this part. And one of the reasons I really wanted to have you guys on the show is we all know we're in a cultural moment where people are very open and interested in what does it look like to have cross-cultural friendships? How can I be a part of racial healing in our country, et cetera? And that can create a lot of people who are all of a sudden starting to talk about it. But when I read your book and I knew the backstory, and I'm like, no, you guys have been about this for decades. This is not new for you in 2020. And I think that it's really important for us in this moment that we're in to be listening to the wisdom of those who have been doing this for a while. And I just would love to hear, for you, if y'all could just tell me in like 5 minutes your whole friendship story. Just kidding. If you could just give me Gary, maybe you'll start us off. And can you just tell us about kind of the genesis of your friendship? And then Clarence, maybe you can jump in with why you guys wanted to write this book.
Yeah, well, way back when, in the late 60s, I was working as a youth pastor in a church. And on Tuesday nights, we had a gymnasium, and it was a new gym, and that's where we were meeting. And one night, and it was an all-white church in the late 60s, and there was probably 100 kids there that night. And these two black guys walk in. And my leadership adults kind of looked at me and pointed like, do you see that? and I did kind of, it's okay. And later I found out that, integration was just starting here in our city. Wow. And some of our students had invited one of his friends to come. And so he invited Clarence, and they came. And so I met them that night. And then at the end of the night, I said, hey guys, we're here every Tuesday night, and you guys are always welcome. And they started coming. And that was the genesis of our friendship together. And we could go on, but eventually Clarence came to Christ, and eventually I started spending time with him in the scriptures and meeting regularly with him and challenge him to do such things as memorizing scripture. And so it kind of started out, that part of it, as a mentoring friendship. It later, of course, became much, much more personal and deep. Sometimes mentoring relationships go for, a year or so, and then couples, they split and go somewhere else. But even with Clarence having gone to Colorado Springs a number of years ago, I mean, we're still friends forever.
Yeah.
And so, that's where it all started, way back when there's a lot of tension racial tension in our city.
Wow. So Clarence, tell us a little bit about why this book, like why now?
Well, I actually wanted to write this book for a long time, and I've been after Gary for a long time to write this book, since we're going to be real. And, he said he didn't feel qualified. And then I said, we got to tell a story. But actually, to be honest, there was a white couple in a city that's known historically for just a lot of racial problems. And I was there speaking about marriage, and she said, since you and Gary are such good friends, if you guys wrote a book together, I think that'd be a great model for other people how to build cross-cultural relationships. So really, the book is dedicated to her and her husband, but they were the ones who had the idea. Then I just pursued Gary because he's always writing books with people or by himself. And So once I got on the schedule, I think in 2017 we committed to write the book, and then so the book's been done for a while. Then the publisher pushed it back a year, which I wasn't really
Yeah.
excited about, because I felt like, hey, I'm on the endangered species list. You got to get this book out as soon as possible. And y'all laugh, but I'm true. I'm serious. With George Floyd, Breonna
Yeah.
Taylor, and stuff that's happening. I've never seen so many Black men, professional athletes, that because I work with some, so fearful, as opposed to the 60s when I met Gary in 1968. There's a different kind of fear.
Interesting.
It's much more intense, and it's much more personal. So when we wrote the book, and just honestly from people reading the book, I've been blown away how people say it's been so helpful, or when Gary and I speak together, it's just our story. I don't think we think that much
Right.
about it, but when people hear it, they're mesmerized. And even on call-in shows, people don't typically call in because people say, we just want
Oh,
to hear,
wow.
so
I also really like that you threw shade at Gary about not writing a book with you. That was probably my favorite part of that whole conversation. Well, and what you said, I know, but I want to go back. I want to go back because I'm like, it's Gary Chapman, and you're like, but I like it. That just goes to show what kind of guy Gary is. So Clarence, you said you wanted to write this book for a long time. You guys then got prompted,
Yes.
obviously, by a place that you were speaking. But what was in your heart about writing the book in the first place? I know you work in diversity, and you're a diversity consultant, and obviously you're very aware of the world. It sounds like you are often in white spaces. So I just would love to hear more about what was behind it for you.
Well, the idea was not mine, but once I heard the idea, I thought it was a
Yeah.
great idea. And Gary's kind of like, I don't know if you're old enough, but there's an actor named Jimmy
Okay.
Stewart, and everybody loves Jimmy Stewart. And so when I use a diversity training, I use a clip of him in a movie that's a true story in American history, and everybody loves Gary Chapman. So I thought if Gary Chapman talks about
Yeah.
race, everybody's going to listen. And when I talk to African Americans who've read the 5 love languages, and I tell them about our story, sometimes when I'm speaking at a marriage conference, they say, well, we always really cared about Gary. We liked him and loved his stuff, but now we care for him
Yeah.
even more. And so it just adds a depth of relationship that people didn't know about him that I think they ought to know about. And I just, again, think our relationship is not the only one, is not unique, but I think having a relationship for 54 years from 1968 to the present, people, that really speaks to people, more than I
Yeah.
realize.
Oh my gosh. I agree. And I think you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it sounds like you said, man, there's a different kind of fear to be a Black man in America, is a different kind of fear. And it sounds to me like you were like, hey, I want to cash in on some of Gary's influence in these spaces to be a person who speaks out and speaks up about what God calls us to in diversity. I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but I feel that sense of like, yeah, this is an opportunity to be an advocate who says, let's talk about the biblical principles behind cultural friendships, cross-cultural friendships.
Well, I think, Gary's very similar to me to the guy who headed up Promise Keepers, Coach McCartney. And Coach McCartney could say some things about race that were true that an African-American couldn't say that would be received by a white
Yeah.
audience. And Gary can say things because he's so beloved to the white community that they don't feel offended, they don't feel threatened, but they listen to him. So I think that's really, really important. And I think for us together and writing the book together sends that kind of message out. But also the book is not binary. We don't talk just about us. We talk about Asians, Hispanics, so Native Americans. So I want people to know that
And
as
I
well.
feel like, honestly, like for me, the book was like, it was just like going back to school about healthy friendship more than anything. I think obviously race is a piece that you guys address directly and you really speak to. But as I was reading through it, I'm like, this is just a really good reminder about what healthy relationships look like, how friendships can be different. What does it mean to really be a good friend? And I mean, I've always loved that practical nature of all of Gary's work and your work together. That's one thing that really stood out to me. And Gary, I'm curious for you, you've gone through all these seasons in the church and in your ministry where you've been in all of these spaces. Why this book now for you? What are you seeing in the world right now that this is what you wanted to offer next?
Well, I think it's basically what Clarence said. I just saw the tension that's in the
Mm-hmm.
country. And I heard a lot of Christians struggling in their own mind, with, I wish I could do
Mm-hmm.
something, but I don't know what I can do. And when Clarence and I talked about it, I thought, here's something every person can do. It's a matter of getting the vision and then taking the steps and sometimes the risk of just kind of reaching out and trying to start a conversation
Mm-hmm.
with somebody that might have the potential of developing into a friendship. And so I just felt like this was another season, just similar to what we were when we began, that we just needed to do something.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, what we were asking throughout the whole book is, what if every Christian in this country had at least one really close personal friendship with someone of a different race or culture?
Mm-hmm.
We just think it would make a huge difference
Mm-hmm.
in the climate.
I can't agree more. You kind of have started to allude to some of those steps, but let's get into it a little bit. Let's get into what some of those practical steps are for that exact person you just described. They want to be part of the solution, but they don't know where to start. So what are some of those steps that someone can take toward a true cross-cultural friendship?
Well, I think number one is pray.
Mm.
Take it to God. And that's one of the things we challenge in the book. Read the book and then just ask God,
Mm-hmm.
really, would you like for me to try to begin to develop a friendship with somebody of a different race or culture?
Mm.
This is on God's heart.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask God, I think you put it on your heart. So I think for the Christian, that's where it starts. And then I think you begin just to open your eyes and look at the people around you, because most of us have at least proximity to people of a different race or culture. And so we start looking around us to see who's there. And then it really, the first step is just talking to somebody. I'm not talking about hallway conversation. Good morning, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? I mean, we do that at the workplace, walking up and down the hall, sometimes with people of a different race, but we don't even know their names.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we had a conversation? What's your name? Where are you from? What are you doing? Where are you? Just a conversation. It kind of starts there.
Clarence, how do we navigate great steps? Obviously, obvious steps, right? But how do we navigate that feeling of, is this tokenism? Am I like pursuing because I've got to be the Christian who's got the friends, and how do we not have that kind of come across in relationship?
Well, I think that's a really great question, Gary. I'll take that one too. But I think the thing about that is you might get that, you might hear that, or you might, as you're trying to figure this out, there's not a real science
Mm-hmm.
to it. But as you initiate conversations, in the Bible, it talks about men and acting like men. The word there actually means initiate, and it also says take courage. So if we as Christians by faith will just go up to someone who's different and just say hello, that can go a long way. So begin to talk about things, or don't be afraid to make mistakes and just say, hey, you know what? Can I ask you a really silly question? All this stuff is going on. I don't know what's going on. Could I ask you a couple of questions? Would you be patient enough to let me be ignorant and just help me with that? And so I've seen those work. The reason I was late today, I was just talking with a guy at lunch who was saying, hey, I think I can learn some stuff from you. Can we talk about some of this? Because I don't understand some of the differences. And then my attitude has to be that, okay, sure, if you want to know about this, this is my perspective. And I think this is what the Bible is saying about that. So I think those are really important mindsets to, it's like sharing the gospel. And we leave the results to God, but we have a responsibility to speak out, not preach at people, but speak out and develop relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also like one of these things with race to me that I feel like has been a little bit of a guiding star is one of the ways to not be like, this person's my project. Like, don't ask them about how they can help you with race before you know their spouse's name, their kids' names, what they like to do on a Saturday, like what's their favorite, like basically how do we like actually genuinely pursue common interest and some level of I'm interested in you as a person, so that the person doesn't receive it as like, I'm not responsible for being your project, like being your one black friend. That's a silly almost feels like it doesn't need to be said, but I think that can help a lot. It's like a genuine curiosity in someone else's life.
I agree. I agree with that. I think one of the words we use in the book is courtesy.
Yeah.
And that word comes from two Greek words. One means the mind and the other means friend. So it's to be friendly minded. In other words, just treat the people that you interface with as though they were your friend. Treat them the way you would treat a friend. And if you start doing that, you're going to ask those kind of questions of them, and you're going to get to know them, and they're going to get to know you. And it's not, you certainly don't walk up and say, I need to have a black friend or a white friend. They're a person. Treat them as a human.
Yeah, yes.
We're all humans. And if we treat each other with dignity and respect and reach out like that with courtesy, that's going to go a long ways in starting a friendship.
Yeah.
I also think it's sort of like dating, but it's also, if you look at Jesus and the Samaritan woman, Jesus took a lot of risks. But a couple of things he did, he treated her with dignity, but he also created a safe place for her. But he met her where she was. When he first started talking to her, she was talking about water, so he talked about water. And so if you're going to do the cross-cultural thing, you get into a conversation, and they may talk about some things you may not be interested in, but then you need to learn about those things, not to prove who's right or wrong, but to show interest in what they're thinking. And it could be a win-win for both of you. So I think having some courage but creating a safe place for people to talk. But also Jesus put himself in a position to be rejected, because she did initially, but he also had staying power. And a lot of times in cross-cultural situations, we talk about conflict, even initial conflict, and you have to stay there. Because Gary and I, first time he picked us up, we had a little bit of conflict. But what was so cool about that, he didn't run away, he didn't quit, he didn't say, I'm not going to fool with these young boys. It really made us closer, three of us closer to each other, because we heard each other's perspectives.
What do you do about sometimes I feel like I might get myself in a situation where I've said, hey, if I say something ignorant, like, please bring it to my attention or whatever, but you've got that little back feeling like, am I going to say something or do something that's offensive and this person's not going to tell me? How did you guys break through? It sounds like, Clarence, you were willing to bring something to Gary's attention, even though he's older than you and, was in a position of authority.
Well, I'm a little bit of a rebel. And
so look for a rebel. Got it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I honestly, before I came to Christ, I was going to be a Black Panther, because I just wasn't going to take all the stuff my dad took. I just, no way I was going to do that. But when Gary called us a name, wasn't a bad name. It's just, what he age appropriate name. But for us, and where our dads had been demeaned, we were just taught not to accept that. That was
talking about calling you a boy, right? I think I read that.
Calling us boys. Yeah, calling us boys. Now, we were boys because I think I was 15 and James was 14. But we'd seen our fathers, grown men, called boy in a derogatory way. And so even though Gary was not saying it in a derogatory way, just hearing it from a white person, we kind of reveled up and said, we ain't boys, and then Gary in his wisdom say, okay, evidently there's a problem here, we need to talk about it. And which we did, which I love the fact that he sort of modeled what Jesus did with the Samaritan woman. We talked through our misunderstanding.
Yeah. Gary, tell me your side of that.
Well, I was blown away when they were on the porch and I came by to pick them up and take them to the meeting, and I just got out of the car and started walking toward the house. And I said, "You boys ready to go?" And his friend James said, "We ain't no boy." And I realized, But when I listened to them tell what Clarence has just talked about and how their fathers are treated and how that was a derogatory term, I said, "Guys, I get it, man. I'm sorry. I had no idea." And I said, if I were going to pick up two white guys at your age, I would have said boys, because to me it's an age thing. Right. It's nothing racial, But that's just an example of the fact that we will see things differently along the way, and there, But if we listen to each other and try to see their perspective, then it builds our friendship.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit more. I loved the part on conflict. Again, good for any relationship, not just for cross-cultural relationships, although just like the story you guys shared, there's more room for misunderstanding. So we have to make room for how are we going to rectify misunderstandings. But talk to me a little bit about this whole, how to do conflict. You guys lay it out really well in the book.
Well, I think one thing that's important is that you hear each
Mm-hmm.
other and then you process that. And another thing is that the friendship has to be greater than the conflict.
Yes.
And so being right can't be the most important
Mm,
thing. The other person is really more important.
mm-hmm.
And for Gary and for me, at least for me and James, when Gary sat down and talked to us and heard our perspective and we heard his, it actually made us
Mm-hmm.
closer. And so he could have acted at that point, he could have called his boys after that because we understood, but he never
Mm-hmm.
did. So I think when you have conflict, we have to listen really carefully, hear the other person's perspective, and then you move on in the context of understanding that's really important to that
Mm-hmm.
person, or we shouldn't say this or do
Mm-hmm.
that, and you keep going with that. So I think that was important for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah, and I think also, if we listen empathetically, that is, try to put yourself in their shoes, not trying to shoot down what they say, but trying to understand what they say and understand their feelings. So then you can honestly say, man, I hear what you're saying, and I can see how that makes sense. I
Mm-hmm.
can see how you would respond that way,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And now you've learned something about each other's culture, and this is true not just in black white, as Clarence said. This is true in any culture.
Yep.
There are cultural differences, and we use the same words sometimes that mean different things by
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also, when we're having conflict, person could be right, another person say, "Hey, you're right. That makes sense," and they agree. Or you can sometimes meet in the middle, or sometimes you can agree to disagree
Right.
agreeably. But again, the conflict can never be more important than the individual or the friendship.
What would you guys say? Oh, this is such a good topic. I'm sure you guys, from my last book was on conflict and conflict resolution. And as I was doing a book tour around and I would talk with people, they would never, like almost everyone I talked to had a significant breach in relationship over the last 3 years. Family, extended family, friendship. What do you say to the person who says, but the conflict apparently was greater than the friendship? Like, that's where I'm at. What have you, I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but what have you seen? And particularly, it's been very much centered around the politicized part of race and what that looks like in our country. That has been at one of those breach points. But for you guys in your own lives, what happens when the conflict is greater than the friendship, at least on one side?
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, in some of those cases, I realized that person I thought was a friend was just an
Mm-hmm.
acquaintance, and they really weren't a friend. And even though we may have done things together, I still show respect. I still don't put that person down. I just may
Yeah.
disagree, and that in some worst case scenarios, then we don't continue to communicate a lot. It really sort of depends on them. But I think that's the biggest thing as you ask that question is just really for me, with a couple people, not a lot, cross cultures, really defined that they were really more of an
Mm-hmm.
acquaintance than a
Mm-hmm.
friend. And the race thing kind of brought up, it was for them bigger than our
Mm-hmm.
friendship or relationship.
Yeah, I think you talk
Yeah.
about in the book situational friendships and
Hmm.
professional relationships. And sometimes we get all those bound, like with those wires crossed, and we don't realize, oh, when push comes to shove, the situation was more important than the friendship. Like that,
Mhm.
we were bound by a situation. We were not bound by actual
Yeah,
friendship.
and I think those kind of friendships are good.
Yeah.
Situational friendships. Often those are at work. Because you're together and you have lunch together,
Mm-hmm.
and you have break times together, and you do share life with each other, and each of you would call each other a friend. But if one of you leaves the work situation and goes to another job, often there's no further contact.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that you were mad at each other. It's just that it was a situational friendship. You were friends because you were thrown together, but it wasn't deep enough to go beyond the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens often. And I'm not against situational
Yeah.
friendships. Those are good places to start. But some of those, hopefully, will work into long-term, deep personal friendships.
So how do we move in that direction? I think there's such a loneliness epidemic. We're probably addressing some real felt needs for people who are like, I think let's say I'm midlife and I'm just like, who are my actual friends? People that I thought were my friends are
Mm.
not my friends when we start talking about whatever that topic is. How do we move? What are some steps that we take to maybe move toward more meaningful friendships within situational or professional relationships?
I think one is getting to know their family members.
Mm,
first of all, their names, and start praying for, if you're a Christian, start praying for their family members. And maybe say to them, even they're non-Christians. So, the other night I was thinking about John and your son, and you mentioned this about it. I was just praying that, God would really help in that situation. Wow. They walk away thinking, man, they prayed for my son. I mean, they're more into me than I am into them. But I think it's those kind of things, showing interest in things that they have an interest in, and family, if they're in a family, family's most important. And when you show interest in their family, and you find out it's their birthday, and you got a little gift, and say, take this home to your son. Tell him John gave it to him. He doesn't even know John yet, but he might get to know John later.
Well, and I think this whole thing of listening, I think listening is an art. A lot of people, when you listen to them, it communicates you care about them. And so when they're talking to you, maybe the first or second time you're talking at lunch or coffee, ask them more questions about themselves. And the more you ask them about themselves and let them tell about themselves, they're going to feel loved. They're going to feel like, hey, this person, or at least liked, and say, this person really thinks and cares about me. And that's a great way to build a friendship, because we want friends or people who care about us. So that's a great way to start. And so listening is really an art. And then if we hear what they're saying and respond to that, and I think maybe the first couple of times, just really focus on them and not worry about communicating what we want to do or think. I think that's a great way to start a friendship.
So good. Okay, one personal question for you guys as we're getting ready. We're getting near the end of our time. I've loved this time. You guys, the book is so rich. It addresses it's such a wide breadth of like practical knowledge. I really do. I was going to ask you who the book's for, but I think it's for everyone. So I'm going to leave it with it's for everyone. But here's my question. How has your friendship weathered COVID, race reckoning in America, our political environment in these last few years? Have you guys seen things from the same viewpoint, or how have you related to one another through this time?
Well, I think there is a sense in which none of those things affect our friendship. I mean, we're committed to each other. I know Clarence is there for me. Whatever would happen in my life, I know he'd be there for me. And he feels the same way I think about me. And so in that sense, none of these things have, fractured our relationship and anything like that. I do think that these things have brought to our attention the fact there's a whole lot of people don't have a relationship like we have. That if they had, they would be seeing things very, very different in today's world. Yeah. And I think that's a part of what really motivated us. But, as you mentioned this a little bit earlier, that there's a whole lot of people that don't have a friend in their own culture. Yeah. And we want to go in our culture, but beyond our culture. Yeah.
Well, I think for me, our history is so long. And when when he introduced me to Christ, that's a life-changing deal. But, and I also saw some looks he received by being my friend. He's gotten a lot of criticism of being my friend. And so that's spoken volumes to me. So he's taken some risks to be my friend. But then when my dad died, he, for all practical purposes, became my dad. And so those things that you don't quit, you don't quit on somebody. There's a huge trust factor, but he still listens. And I think our doing the book and speaking together, we've just gotten closer. And there are times if he's on a radio show by a different culture, and I want to make sure he doesn't get blindsided. I might say, Gary, you need to read this. You don't have to agree with it, but I don't want you to get blindsided if they ask you questions about this. And so it's just this, and I love hanging out with him. So it's just, I didn't think we could get closer, but I just feel just really close to him. So the COVID, we've been praying for each other for years. He supports our ministry. We pray for his family, his grandkids, like my niece and nephew. And so it's a very close, special relationship. I think it's a gift from God. So nothing is really, I don't think anything can really destroy our relationship. I think God has just blessed us in it.
Really what I feel like you guys are saying is the trust that you had built meant that both of you have a broader perspective on life, which to me is really the beauty of, every nation, tribe, and tongue will worship the Lord, is that we get to have a broader perspective when our friendships increase and deepen across cultures and across backgrounds. And you guys are living proof of that. And it's just delightful to see. So the book is Life-Changing Cross-Cultural Friendships. You guys pick it up, pick up a couple, do it with a group, man. What a great way to use your Bible study. Use your Bible study to actually do something transformative. I love Bible study. I love Bible knowledge, but Bible knowledge should be transforming your heart, and this will help you get in that direction. So you guys, thank you so much for being with us on Let's Be Real. It's been very real and very awesome. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.
Lost with you, flying through the mountain ranges, but I never see the danger. That final